to what they were planning to do in Libya. We go to Rick Leventhal in Manchester, England, with the very latest right now. Sir.
Neil, an aggressive investigation on the ground here in Manchester, resulting in several more arrests here today, but also arrests in Tripoli, Libya. As you know, the authorities quickly identified 22-year-old Salman Abedi as the suicide bomber who killed 22 and injured more than 100, 20 of them critically, in the attack after that Ariana Grande concert. Highest state of alert. Authorities here are convinced that Abedi had help, that he was part of a terror network, and that the bomb maker who built the sophisticated and activated more than 1,000 British soldiers, or about 1,000 British soldiers, to patrol and maintain key sites here, Neil, including Buckingham Palace and the Houses of Parliament.
All right, Rick, thank you very much. Rick Leventhal with the latest from Manchester. As you know, the latest reports we get out of Britain is they're under the highest terror alert right now, critical, and that means that there could be something imminent in that country, and there's reason for the fear. Let's get the very latest on all of this with Katie Hopkins, a DailyMail.com global columnist. Katie, what is the fear right now?
It's very real. I can't explain it to you any better than that actually, it's every minute of every day. I've been speaking to a lot of people today, and they don't know why they're so tired. And it's that fatigue you get of always being slightly aware that you might be a target. People here genuinely are frightened for their children now. I've had a lot of emails from mothers, from fathers saying, I don't want to go out. I won't take my child to the mall this weekend. I don't want my child going on the school trip. I've just cancelled my school trip. I won't let my child go out after the football match. I want him home. And there's a lot of texts being sent. A lady I saw earlier said she'd had 3 texts from her mother already today, just checking she's okay. So there's this kind of weird, all-pervasive fear. And it's very curious because we have our leaders standing up saying, we are strong, we are united, we are defiant, we will not let terrorists win. And then at the same time behind them, 3,800 troops, military armed personnel, are marching into London, 1,000 of whom, as your reporter rightly says, are at Buckingham Palace. Another 2,800 dotted around places, Houses of Commons shut to the public, and also changing of the guard cancelled. I saw a group of school children today. I think they were French kids piling off a bus, and I wanted to shout at them, you know, break up, run away, you know, split up. Don't be all in one place. I'm genuinely frightened for people, and you see soft targets everywhere. And that's very much what the terrorists have managed to hospital, and doesn't even know her child is dead yet. It really strikes at the heart of mothers and fathers all over the country.
You know, we're learning now that Salman Abedi, who was behind this attack, and that this might have been a more widespread planned attack, but that he was known to authorities. His recent visit to Libya, some chatter on the internet and on social media sites where authorities might have known that he was being radicalized. Very easy for me to play Monday morning quarterback here and wondering why they did not follow up, but we keep seeing this play out. What's the reaction on the part of Britons to this news?
It's very, so Britain is in a very difficult place. You know, regular people, normal people, upset, shocked, heartbroken by what's happened to our country. And then what we're faced with this afternoon is a few hard facts that are very difficult to hear. They knew he was on the watch list. He was on the watch list. We always get this information. He was known to authorities, which means, frankly, nothing. We know he just arrived back from Libya via Syria, where they believe he was radicalized. We know that he was acting strangely in his home. He was doing strange things. He was flying a black flag from his window. He was marching up and down the street preaching the Quran. We know this attack was going to happen, quite possibly, and we did nothing about it. We let him walk into our country. We say we will stand up to terror, but in this case, it feels like all we did was put out the welcome mat. And bear in mind, there's 3,000 others just like him roaming our streets. And there's another 650 jihadis returning to the UK. And we are going to let them in, it seems, here in the UK at the moment because of the Liberals that have the kind of authority on what we should think. Liberals believe we should protect the human rights of the jihadi above the actual right to life of our little daughters and our sons. And that's a very hard thing for us to face when we're also told, watch out, we can't tell you where, but an imminent attack is due. So we're waiting for the footstep to fall. I see it like we're like ants and we're just waiting to be crushed. We don't know if we'll be run over, blown up, mown over or taken out with a knife, but we know it's coming.
You know, Katie, maybe you can help me with understanding Manchester. This is obviously a big Libyan community, a Libyan refugee community, I guess dating back to the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi. Largely peaceful community. There haven't been any incidents or problems, but they do stick to themselves. They do stick to each other. What can you tell me about that and whether authorities are trying to get a better handle on that?
It seems very much to me, you know, the truth of the United Kingdom, and it's been true for a long time. We haven't really achieved multicultures. We're kind of groups of monocultures, kind of ghettos of communities, if you will. And Manchester, that's very true. There's a very large Libyan contingent. I was just watching them being interviewed on a programme not so long ago, and there is no remorse there. There is no sense of outrage or shame or the hurt that I've seen here walking around talking to mums. There is very much a sense that it's other communities that are also to blame, that this is a global issue. And what do we expect here if we attack countries, other countries, and that Muslims should not be ashamed and Muslims should stand together. And what this attack has been is a misinterpretation of Sharia. Now, to sit there and watch that just 20 minutes ago was very shocking for me. Wow. And that's the truth of the UK. We can talk about extremists, but actually in many places, in many of the ghettos of monocultures in the UK, it's accepted that Muslims really should be attacking in this way. Here, when you see, you know, 65 children with catastrophic injuries. Amazing. And adults with catastrophic injuries, many of them have going to lose limbs, and the news team at dailymail.com leaving work very upset because they've had to read the reports of what actually happened to those people that were blown apart. And it's a very hard thing. So certainly these groups, these clusters of these communities, they kind of feed into each other because they believe the same thing. It's like a mini echo chamber where you hear, you know, opinions that reinforce your own and that seem to think that this attack in some ways is just vengeance. Amazing. Which is very peculiar to hear.
Katie Hopkins, thank you. A very good view of the scene right there now, which I would justifiably see as horrific. Katie Hopkins, all right, by the way, we are seeing these hearings going on in Capitol Hill right now, featuring the Homeland Security Secretary. Again, the belief right now is that could it happen here, to make sure that it does not. We're monitoring that. Also,
our veterans.
It is not an overstatement to say that some children will die because of this.
This budget is a direct slap in the face to millions and millions of Americans.
Does the president's budget cut $1.3 trillion from Medicaid over 10 years?
I'll ask you a question, Congresswoman. When you say cut, are you speaking Washington or regular language?
All right, that snide response on the part of Budget Director Mulvaney to a query about what the administration is cutting, when the fact of the matter is, as draconian as this budget has been viewed in the press, nothing is being cut in the conventional sense of the word. In other words, going with less than you have now. As Medicaid will grow over the future years, its rate of growth is the only thing that's being cut. In other words, it will still get budgeted for more money, just not as much money as was originally supposed to be the case. And by the way, it will be a $55 trillion worth of government spending in total in the next 10 years. And this budget will cut about $3.5 to $3.6 trillion, so a little bit more than 6.5%, a rounding error on a rounding error. So this is not meant to be a political squabble here, just a discussion of simple math. And for that, I want to go to Austin Goolsbee, the former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama. Now, Austin, I know where you're coming from. and I think you know where I'm coming from on this math here, but if this is heartless and cruel and going to kill children, do you find, as a very smart guy with numbers, that justified, that response justified? And does it make you want to vomit when fellow Democrats say that? I'll let you take it from here.
You know, it doesn't make me want to vomit. I think it's not unfair in this case. Now, they're getting in a big emotional discussion about it.
And
but
wrong
I think
emotional
you know,
discussions.
Neil, that it's very misleading to say that it's not a cut, it's only growing at a rate that's slower than inflation when you know that health care costs are going up over time.
And you also know,
says,
careful. You know that Medicaid was growing at a 9.7% clip. I don't know about you, but a lot of Americans have not been enjoying 9.7% pay raises. So if we bring that down to still something approaching double the inflation rate, that is something
it's not
that's
double
dire.
the health care inflation rate.
No, Medicaid.
Look,
focus on
Neil,
Medicaid, because that's what got them going.
If this were comparable on the defense budget, if we simply made the same argument about the defense budget, you know perfectly well that every Republican that is currently saying this is not a cut
as you
would
know from your
howl and
last
say it was
visit
a
here,
horrible cut to defense.
I'm for looking at everything on the budget, defense included. So I don't want to play the political game with you. I want to play the math game with you. And I'm open to looking at everything. No. I want you to do this for me. I want you to be honest. I want you to tell me when people are bemoaning something growing at a clip that is triple the inflation rate, even more.
No, that is
and you
half
want to
the
contain
medical
that growth.
cost inflation.
No. Let's look at the numbers.
You're comparing the inflation of groceries to the inflation of health care, and that's not correct.
Don't go off on a tangent with me here. Let's talk about the overall budget. $55 trillion spent over the next 10 years.
Okay.
And the administration is looking, and I'm hardly an apologist for them. Keep in mind they don't do my show. Now, they want to pair $3.6 trillion of that over 10 years. You would even have to conclude that is a rounding error on a rounding error, would you not?
Not for the part of the budget that they're cutting. What you are highlighting, Neil, and I agree with it, is that the vast majority of the budget is not discretionary spending. It's Social Security, Medicare, defense, and interest payments. If you don't touch any of those things, that's the lion's share of the $55 trillion. If you don't touch any of those things, then if you want to cut $3 trillion, you have to go savagely hack up the rest of the budget.
Savagely.
And that is what they do.
See, here you're doing the savagely thing. Let's look at this budget. Let's look at Medicaid. All right, $389 billion to billion dollars. The food stamp program, $71 billion today in 2018. That same program under SNAP, or whatever it's called
Neil,
now. Listen, 44 million people are getting some sort of food help. I'm all for helping those who genuinely need it, but Austin, this is not sustainable. This math, this support is not sustainable.
You're trying to change us off the subject of Medicaid. Forget about the fact that Donald Trump
let's go
promised
back to Medicaid. Go back to Medicaid. $389
That's what I want
today.
to talk about.
$389 billion
in
today.
Medicaid.
10 years from now, it's going to be at $550 billion. $550 billion.
You sound like my grandpa, Neil. My grandpa used to say when he was a kid. Wait a minute. In Medicaid, my grandpa used to say when he was a kid, going to the movies cost a nickel. If he gave you a nickel and said, here, go to the movies, you'd be upset.
No, you're
and that's
trying
the
to be
same
cutesy
thing that's
about
happening with Medicaid.
Is a real problem and not sustainable.
Health care is
You're
rising at 3 times the rate of inflation, Neil.
Hey, wait,
so
I thought wait a minute. I thought you solved that with your old boss when you did the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, in case you didn't notice, Neil, the president's trying to repeal that.
No. Go back to what I'm saying. You deflect brilliantly. My point is, if that was such a trick and if it was going to do the cure and get this going again, when do people look at this, Republican and Democrat, in the eyes of the taxpayer, the folks who have to pay the bills, not just the folks who get the stuff? When you have 44 million people on food stamps alone, would you acknowledge, with the recovery that you heralded when Barack Obama was president, that 44 million people on food stamps
They changed the rule so that more people would qualify for food stamps. That's why we have a higher number of people on food stamps now than we had before the recession.
Do you find that figure jarring then? Do you find that figure jarring? An economy as large and rich and accomplished as ours and doing all it did under Barack Obama's years, that 44 people with liberal rules or whatever you're
I don't know, jarring. Like I said, we change. We, society,
I understand we
change the rules.
Do you
so
think
that more
44 million is too
nutrition.
much? Do you think a Medicaid growing at a 9.5+% clip is too much?
You are the one talking about what is a small share of the total. The food stamps is tiny compared to the Medicaid cuts.
We got to get.
Look at Medicaid.
When are Democrats and Republicans alike going to go back and say we can't sustain this?
You're worked up because you know that they've tried some accounting gimmicks and borderline fraud in this budget.
There's no fraud to the numbers I just mentioned to you. There is no fraud to the numbers I just. You know what's a fraud?
I'll give you
Sloughing them over.
Fraud?
No. What's a fraud is telling the American taxpayers.
No,
listen to me. I'm going to let you answer. What is a fraud is telling the American people, pay no attention to those numbers. Pay no attention that they're growing. Pay no attention to that and leave it to the American people to pay for it. They're more than fair points. They're accurate points. People are paying the bills here, Austin, and they're sick of it.
Neil, you're getting worked up. I would get worked up if I were you, too, because I wouldn't want them to see.
And you know why? Because no one in the media is getting worked up. Democrats aren't getting worked up. We are hosing the American people, Austin, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
I am not.
What do you say?
I am not. A estate tax that, on the other hand, he's saying in his tax plan he intends to abolish. That's just outright tax
fraud. All right, go back to what I said about the growth of the I agree with you, by the way. We should be looking at the growth of entitlements, and he kept off that Medicare and Social Security, not sustainable the way it's going. So a pox on everyone's house for doing that. But you cannot look at this entitlement growth in Medicaid and some of these other areas and say they're not ripe for pruning.
Well, when you say not right for pruning, Donald Trump specifically made a core promise of his campaign
get back
that
to
he
the
would
facts
not
I just
allow
mentioned. I'm
anyone
not an
to cut
apologist for Trump.
Medicaid,
I'm not an
and he's
apologist
cutting more than $1 trillion from it.
Democrats, Republicans, this is out of whack, and the taxpayers can't afford it.
You can't interrupt me to make that point, because you know that.
They're getting hosed. They're seeing this math continue and saying, you just pay it, you just pay it, you just pay it, you just pay it.
The best thing Trump has going for him is that nobody's going to read this budget with everything else going on.
I'm going to read it every single night to the American people. Every single night.
Don't take my word for it. Don't take Neil's word for it. Just read it yourself.
For accepting it and letting it go.
No, I'm not accepting. Just let people read it and tell me how they react to it.
I'm done with you now. I'm done. I want to get you back, but thank you very, very much. Okay, well, I'm not hungry anymore. I'm going to skip dinner. We'll have more of this. Keep doing this. We keep adding and insulting each other about Republicans are doing this, Democrats are doing this, and you know what's happening? Our spending going up, and they're getting annoyed when the spending climb is a little slower than up. We keep doing this. There's going to be nothing left for our kids. And depending on the day, if you like your kids, if you like your grandkids, you're doing them a huge disservice. Then again, if you don't, well, that's fine. That's on them. All right, so we're going to explore that. I think Austin Goes is a great guy. Don't get me wrong. Just I think both sides have wonderful views on this subject. But I'm just telling you, I've looked at the math. I've crunched the numbers. I actually looked at this budget. But plenty of holes in it, plenty of problems in it, plenty of estimations in there that are bad. But the basic argument is this. What we have, we cannot sustain. The math cannot sustain it. That's not a Republican saying that or Democrat saying that. That's just someone who appreciates arithmetic. It is not supportable. The way we're going is not supportable. And yet in the middle of this, we are caught in what could be a Watergate-like summer, if you think about it, with growing talks about what the president knew and when he knew it about ties to Russia. Whatever your views on this subject, take this as a very alarming sign. The president is starting to lawyer up. The guy who broke that story joins us right now, Charlie Gasparino. Charlie, what are you finding out?
I'm finding out from here in Naples, Italy, believe it or not, is that the lawyer himself, Mark Cavuto, longtime lawyer for Donald Trump, has done a lot of business with him over the years. And the President Trump turned to him because, you know, this guy is a legal version of Donald Trump. He's a fighter. And I think it's going to be a pretty simple defense from what I understand, Neil. It's going to be simply this. The president has the absolute right to fire the FBI director. That's his call. That's the Constitution. The president said nothing in this case towards an obstruction where he was absolutely looking to where he showed intent to upend an investigation. When he had his private meeting with James Comey before he fired him, when President Trump said, "I would like you not to charge Flynn, the national security advisor, who is, as you know, fired after he did not reveal details about his business engagement with Russia and Turkey." That was a hope, and that's how he's going to argue it. Now, all this may seem politically bad, and it may be. I mean, and the Democrats ever got the House, a possible impeachment proceeding. But, in the legal realm of obstruction, which is probably the case that is most, deadly to Donald Trump, where this falls in, Mark Cavuto has been telling people that they have something that's open and shut. There is no legal grounds for obstruction. If you want to impeach him, that's a whole other thing. That's a political matter, and we'll fight that out with Congress and the American people. But I think that's the tack Cavuto's going to tell you. He's tough.
All right, Charlie Gasparino, thank you. Enjoy your vacation. You've been working through it, my friend. All right, Charlie Gasparino. In the meantime, Great Secretary Kelly is done testifying to a House committee right now on our own preparations that we're making ahead of the Memorial Day weekend on the growing threats that obviously have been crystallized with these attacks in Manchester, England. Fox News correspondent Ellison Barber with the latest on how all of that went down. Ellison.
The focus of this hearing was the DHS budget request for 2018. But of course, what happened in Manchester came up at the beginning. And Secretary Kelly said the U.S. is working with the United Kingdom to assist in their investigation. And as soon as Secretary John Kelly sat down to begin his testimony, TSA, one of DHS's officials, told Fox News they are, quote, currently testing adjusted screening procedures for carry-on bags and other accessible property at about a dozen select U.S. airports, with the potential to expand to other airports nationwide. Officials say travelers are going. It could mean more bag checks, but TSA officials say they're testing quicker and more targeted procedures. Secretary Kelly talked about the consistent threats facing the U.S.
We know that threats are out there. We know that our passenger aviation, as an example, are a top prize in the eyes of terrorist organizations. We know that threats are out there. We know that our passenger aviation, as an example, are a top prize in the eyes of terrorist organizations around the globe. We know that transnational criminal organizations are bringing drugs across our borders, both on land and sea, in massive numbers.
And he said the president's budget proposal helps them deal with all of that. President Trump's budget proposal gives DHS $44.1 billion in 2018, nearly 7% more than last year's budget. Secretary Kelly may be a fan of this budget, but of course, Neil, Congress also needs to be a fan, and regardless of what piece you're looking at in this budget, so far it seems like the majority of lawmakers have more issues than good things to say when it comes to the budget.
All right, Ellison, thank you very, very much. All right, we had a former Barack Obama budget cruncher, Austin, going to grow, just not as much. I wonder what
that they've tried some accounting gimmicks and borderline fraud in this budget.
There's no fraud to the numbers I just mentioned to you. There is no fraud to the numbers I just mentioned. You know what's a fraud?
I'll give you
Sloughing them over. No. What's a fraud is telling the American taxpayers. No, listen to me. I'm going to let you answer. What is a fraud is telling the American people, pay no attention to those numbers. Pay no attention that they're growing out of whack with the taxpayers' ability to afford them. I'm a nerd, and math upsets me sometimes, so I apologize for those of you who are offended by my exchange with Austin Cavuto, for whom I have great respect. I like him a lot personally, but I don't like a lot what I'm hearing these days on containing the growth in a program, not cutting it, just containing its growth, and that being the equivalent to once again throwing Granny off a cliff. Which brings me to Home Depot. co-founder Ken Langone, who became a gazillionaire, on make of this argument that the way Democrats have presented the Medicaid so-called cuts, which aren't cuts, just off the growth, and we have a chart here that shows its balance right now, what it was going to be for the next 10 years versus what it's going to be under this Trump budget plan. It just curtails the growth, but they are calling it heartless. Just off the growth, and we have a chart here. Cuts and an attack, a cleaver on the middle class. You say what?
I say let's take a program that's grown dramatically in the last 8 years, food stamps. I don't think people die if they don't smoke. I don't think people die if they don't watch movies. How do we make sure that food stamps are being used for what they're called, food? And this, to me, is part of the problem.
Well, 44 million get food stamps under much more generous terms. Now, I'm not saying some, as you've indicated in the past.
Hungry. No American should starve to death. That's part of our culture. That's part of our value system in America. On the other hand, we know what goes on. Hell, people use food stamps to buy marijuana. That's illegal. Or cocaine, or whatever the hell else these people use to get high. How do we make sure that we don't take a system that's well-intentioned that becomes badly abused? How do we take guys like me, who outrageously get $40,000 a year from our government, after I've done as well as I've done?
$40,000 for what?
Social Security. Oh yeah.
So you don't. So you would be saying to Republicans as well, you know,
I'm saying to a whole bunch of them.
Right.
I'm saying to a whole bunch of them.
You're sick of it.
Not that I'm sick of it. We have the technology today to be able to do a better job of administering these plans. This notion that if somebody gets in an accident and they take them to an emergency room.
That we have some numbers out from the CBO on the administration's, or more to the point, Republicans' American Health Care Act. Now, of course, you have right to hospitals. You do a lot of good for folks and all.
Sometimes.
But this calls for would reduce federal deficits by $119 billion over the coming decade, but increase the number of people who aren't insured by 23 million in 2026 relative to the current law. And I don't know how they came to this conclusion. About 12 million have Obamacare now. So how they can come.
Let me say something. Go back all the way to the creation of Obamacare. I think they had one thing in mind when they created it: a single payer. That's what they wanted. And they created a law that guarantees, by its own failings, it'll have to what I think America wants. If I want to buy my own health insurance, as I should, and I want to pay for it as I can, then I should be able to do it. I think this was all a scheme going all the way back to how do we put a system in place that will collapse of its own weight. And that's what we've done.
Well, let me ask you this. What is a cut, smithereens, the social safety net? I'm thinking, well, they're wiping it out. When, in fact, I discover with Medicaid and not some of these other, we're slowing the rate of growth. But that's entered the vernacular. Just like the argument that if you're anti-illegal immigration, it morphed into you're anti-immigrant. Ken Lingo, what's a cut
to you?
Cut
to me is if you're getting $4 and now you're getting $3.80, that's a cut. A cut is not when I'm getting $4 and next year I was going to get $4.40 and instead I'm only going to get $4.30. That's not a cut.
They call that a cut.
Well, guess what? That's what politicians do. It's all about illusion.
So what would you do? What would you tell them to do? Because in the past you've said open everything up to scrutiny and watch the budget. Absolutely.
$900.
Absolutely.
$900 for a toilet seat that we're happy to sell you at Home Depot for $27. The same toilet seat, and we make a nice buck on it at $27.
Right, right. But the common sense is out, and yet what worries me, about all of this is we're getting people who, this is all they hear. They're cutting, we're going to leave people destitute, they're going to leave them starving, they're going to do this. My point with, let's say, the food stamp, the SNAP program, if 44 million are getting something off of this program, whether it's for food or not, we have bigger problems than just a budget issue.
Absolutely. Let me tell you something. The biggest single threat to life as we know it in America, in my opinion, is income inequality. You let that gap get wide enough, as it did in Cuba, as it did in Argentina, as it did in Venezuela, and people will go for the most likely route to give them what they want, okay? We can't afford now. The gap is as much an effect as it is a cause of problems. The effect of it is, it's an effect of bad education in America, public education in America. We're depriving these kids of the chance to compete. I had dinner last night with Dave Cody, retired chairman of Honeywell. Honeywell's got jobs opening all over. But the people have to have qualifications. How can we hire you to work at Home Depot if you can't pass a simple reading or math test? Customer comes in and says, well, how do I use it? And the kid looks at the directions and he can't read the directions. Doesn't work.
So when you talk about this chasm, which you and I have talked about in the past between the rich and the poor, that's widened under Republican and Democratic administrations, one of the typical ways they try to address that is have the government get involved and forcibly adjust it. What do you think of that?
You can't do it. It won't work. Look, anytime you engage in something that's fundamentally unnatural, expect unnatural results. Okay? A good, for instance, frankly, is celibacy in the Catholic Church. We're going to have to come to grips as Catholics with the notion that we're going to have to think about letting priests get married. By the way, 1,000 years ago, we had a pope that had a family.
All right, I didn't know how we veered into celibacy.
Well, what I mean is that's not...
No, I understand.
Bad things happen because we're creating an environment...
But how can we ever get serious about dealing with this stuff, Ken? And on the right and the left.
You want to know something?
When we trivialize it to the degree we do.
You know what has me concerned? Election night when Trump won, I said, here's our chance to drain the swamp. I still think we have that opportunity. But the media in America today, who was a loser last election, there was no doubt about where the media was. The media, the Democrats.
Or where they still are.
The Republicans? Come on. Trump was not loved.
So how do they answer this? Now, Mulvaney, how do you think he answered it? And sometimes he just didn't, he wasn't able to be forceful enough.
Look, Trump is as good a negotiator as anybody. To me, as I view this budget, okay, here's the opening bid, boys, let's talk. It's a negotiation. Now, the bits and pieces, you got to drill down. But the drama of it, we're going to make people starve. People aren't going to have health care.
But that's coming from no less than the Pope, that you can't forget the forgotten, you can't forget. And here the President and the Pope meet today.
Hold it. The Pope is our spiritual leader. God bless him. Okay? And the Pope, certainly in matters of faith, he's it. I don't think the Pope has the qualifications to be discussing such arcane things as how governments spend money.
You realize you're going to go to hell now.
I hope not. But I may.
Yeah, you may. No, I'm glad to see you, my friend. I wanted to get the perspective of a guy who's had some success, helped a lot of people out, because something is morbidly wrong.
Neil, we are the greatest country on earth, and the next 25 years are ours, unless we work overtime to screw it up.
Well said. Well said.
Okay?
You just gave, by the way, the best definition of a cut I have ever heard. Touche. You might have a future. Keep up with this.
Keep it up. I'm trying to work. Hey, look, I'm only 82. I got a chance to have a good career.
All right. We've only just started. These kind of headlines, people afraid to go abroad and travel, people afraid suddenly to go to concerts or public venue events, parents very concerned about dropping their kids off pretty much anywhere. Those kids afraid to leave their parents or go anywhere. The best-selling author, Bishop T.D. Jakes, on what he makes of this circumstances.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure.
How do you advise parents, everyone? All of a sudden, I had a good friend of mine who was rethinking a trip to London, as it would turn out, because of everything that's transpired. What do you tell them?
You know, a certain amount of fear is a healthy thing. It makes us more cautious. It makes us more suspect. When we see something, we say something, a certain amount of fear is a healthy thing. We see something, we say something, we're more aware, more alert. But if we have the kind of fear that causes us to be paralyzed in our activities, then the terrorists have won. And so we have to balance those two extremities and hold on to hope and refuse to succumb to the temptation to stay at home and hide. We will play right into our enemy's hands.
But you know, Bishop, a lot of parents in particular, especially parents of kids, like those who go to Ariana Grande concerts, they don't want to take any chances. It's one thing they say to be cavalier. It's another thing to put their kids in harm's way.
I can totally understand that. I raised 5 children. I get it. And I think every parent has to ask the kind of questions and scrutinize the sort of activities. And then we have to step up our ability to protect these types of large events and venues. I'm getting ready to do a large one myself. MegaFest is coming down on us in June.
Have you made any special precautions for that event?
You know, we have worked very, very diligently with the officials on all levels to make sure that our event is safe, and we are much more conscious today than we were, say, 5 or 10 years ago about terrorists, about bombs, about parking, about everything. Yeah. You simply have to be if you're going to do a major event today.
You know, Bishop, we're learning a lot more about the assailant here and his connections, that he might have had accomplices, that his brother and father were arrested in Libya today. But we knew a lot about him, but you get separate reports that some authorities were afraid to pursue, that maybe in Manchester, where there's a big Libyan refugee population, maybe they were skittish to do it. So much we don't know, so I don't want to attach any blame here, far be it. But is that a problem, that we are afraid to follow up on stuff because it is, after all, just chatter?
You know, Neil, this is a kind of problem like you and I would have never imagined when we were kids. Right. Because I think that sometimes when we stereotypically say this is a most likely terrorist without adequate information, we limit ourselves. When you look across the global board at terrorism, there's no stereotypical person. It's an ideology. Sometimes it's an American, sometimes it's an African, sometimes it's a Muslim. And so I think we have to be very, very cautious.
What did you think of the president calling those who do this sort of thing losers?
I would have liked to have heard a stronger term. It was a strange term to me to describe it, but I understood what he meant by what he said, and I understand the semantics are not really totally the issue, but it's not a term I would have used.
Now, obviously, there's going to be a very chilling move right now where everyone's going to get closely scrutinized. We're going to follow people. A lot of people worry about invasion of privacy. As a man of God yourself, I mean, can you go too far with this stuff?
Well, you know, privacy is important. I think it's very important to us as Americans. Not only a right that we ought to have and enjoy, I think that there is some psychological damage when we all feel like that we are being observed 24/7. We were not designed not to have some level of privacy and intimacy, and life outside of the public eye can be quite brutal. On the other hand, we don't want to be terrorized every time we walk down the street, and I think we really have to balance those two extremities in a way that respects the American citizen, but really bores down on those persons who are suspected to be terrorism. I think that we can do a lot about suspected terrorism. What bothers me is that there are some people that you would never suspect. We're fighting an ideology. It's not a country. It's not a culture. It's an ideology.